Everyone tells you to get a high yield savings account because, it's good to have a savings account. That is absolutely a true thing. You should have a savings account open, but with savings account rates hitting all-time lows, should you really be opening a savings account in 2020? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jacob Fisher, and today we are talking about savings accounts, specifically if savings accounts or high yield savings accounts are worth it in 2020. I know, an absolutely thrilling topic, but trust me, it does get a bit interesting further along. The Fed has reduced rates drastically low to allow for lower interest rate loans to be taken out, among other reasons, but this has also caused savings accounts to have historically low interest rates. In fact, some of the highest yield savings accounts out there, I remember when they were at like 1.5%, and now they're only sitting around 0.8 or 0.6%. And inflation sits at an average rate of return, well, not really return, but an average rate of increase of 3.22% a year. So that means you are losing money every year because inflation just gets higher and higher, and your money doesn't go along with it. On another note, I had no idea that inflation was this high, and I thought it was much lower than this, but I guess it just sits around 3% a year. So anyways, I don't think it's a good idea to use a savings account right now. Of course, this comes with a few things or caveats. If you have an emergency fund, which you should, it doesn't hurt to keep that in a savings account because that will always be there. A 0.60% interest rate from American Express is still better than a 0.01% from your checking account. As long as you have your emergency fund in a savings account, then you are set. But I don't think you should be adding any more money into it, at least not right now. It doesn't make sense with the current interest rates. You could even half your emergency fund so it's not all in your savings account and earning such a low amount of interest over time. I think the better option than a savings account is actually bond ETFs. Now, I'm not saying invest in J&K, which offers a high 5% plus dividend, but one with a more manageable 2 to 3% dividend yield. I'll give some examples in just a minute, but bond ETFs are not affected too much by market conditions. In fact, some of the ETFs I will be mentioning later on did not even dip this past March. Some of them did, but they didn't have such an intense dip to like the whole market dropped 30%. They didn't do that. Many of these bond ETFs don't grow very much over time. AGG, for example, is up only 16% in the last 17 years. It's not even a percent a year. The ETF started around $100 and it only dipped to below that a few times, one of which was around 2008 when it dropped to 90 and then went right back up. These ETFs are designed for a fixed income with a low expense ratio, lowish dividends, and exceptionally low volatility. Let's take a look at a 10-year study with this stock. I think in the last 10 years, a high yield savings account, which have sat around 1% maybe in the last 10 years, a $5,000 savings account would be worth $5,523. While if it were invested in AGG, it would be $7,637, which, if my math is correct, that is more than a savings account. Right, but wouldn't I need to pay more in taxes on dividends than a savings account? For those of you who don't know, any earnings more than $10 would be taxed according to your tax bracket that's in your savings account. Anything more than $10, you would typically get a 1099-INT form, and you would need to add this to your taxes every single year. Dividends are similar. You are taxed at your normal rate unless they are qualified dividends. What's qualified dividends, you ask? Well, I'm glad you did. You have to meet 3 things to have qualified dividends. Number 1 is it is paid by a U.S. corporation or qualifying foreign entity. Number 2, it is actually a dividend, not like something from insurance that's not a dividend. Number 3, and finally number 3, you held the security for long enough. As long as you own the stock for at least 60 days before the ex-dividend date, then the dividend should count as qualified. Then you get a lower tax rate on your dividends. That kind of already saves you money, even though you might not be earning more from those dividends in a high yield savings account. Sure, but savings accounts are safer than these investments, right? Oh, yes, they technically are safer than this investment. While in a savings account, your money is in there and it is safe. You are right, that's true. You can't really lose money in a savings account, especially since the FDIC insures your money of about $250,000. So as long as it's less than that, you will get that money back if the bank goes bust. However, let's take a look at these 8 bond ETFs that you could consider. We first mentioned AGG, and the chart shows they were only under the starting value for a short period of time while paying at 2.6% a year. BND, a similar story, where they only dipped under for a little bit during that same 2008 period, but they didn't really fall much below where you could have gotten in during that time. Maybe you got in after, it all depends, but they don't really drop too much. LQD, a bit higher of a dividend, and still only dropped under around that 2008 period again. VCT was most affected by the pandemic and still pretty much the same story. VSCH, a similar story. These are both corporate bond ETFs, so that's why they dipped more than the other ones. BNDX, again, kind of just chilling. IEF, a focused treasury bond ETF, a 1.98% dividend yield, and still not too affected by things. TIP, sorry, the final one, the chart's a little weird, Google was being strange, but it still never really dipped down. Now, I'm not advocating for you just to get rid of the savings account entirely, because that is 100% safe, and the stock market, well, it's not 100% safe. But these are bond ETFs, which allows you to keep your money really safe. I mean, they're just about as safe as a savings account, but you don't get that FDIC insurance, and I think that's okay. So that's why I moved from putting $100 a month into a savings account to instead putting it into a few of these ETFs, because my money will be pretty safe in there, and it'll grow a lot more than a savings account. Once you get into high yield bond ETFs, you run the risk of the actual underlying asset decreasing in value. But with these low yield, but higher yield than high interest savings accounts, your money will be increasing around the same rate as inflation, if not a little bit more. That just sounds better to me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I upload videos on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on travel and finance. So if that sounds like something interesting to you, make sure you hit that little subscribe button down there. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.